You should have all seen the video circulated with your joining instructions of John fitting a Class 31 sound installation. And now it's your chance this evening to talk to John about fitting decoders and also any problems, troubleshooting that you might want to check out. John Gay is a member of the Digitrains team, and we're very, very grateful to them for supplying the video and also for joining us this evening. And if there are any special requests, let us know through chat, and then we can make sure those questions are passed on to John. So welcome, John. Thank you for joining.
No problem. Thank you for having me this evening. So
I've got one question to start off for you, so it gives people a chance to start adding things into the actual chat. I'm trade manager for the Gay-Joe Guild, as well as being chairman of events.
Okay.
And one of the things I'm finding at the moment is a lot of the DCC suppliers are telling us that they're having a lot of problems actually acquiring decoders.
Yep.
Can you just explain a little bit more about why that is, what's happening with the technology that means particularly the O gauge, the bigger decoders are hard to get at the moment?
Yeah, so the main problem is component shortage, unfortunately. So obviously, as some of you will be aware, there's a global sort of shortage of components. So these components are used in the manufacture of these decoders. And obviously, without them being able to get them, they can't produce the decoders. So there are manufacturers out there who are looking at different makes and models of these components. Some have tried them, and I won't go into names, as I said earlier, but the sort of issue is finding stable components that will work with these units themselves.
Thank you very, very much.
It's all right. So yes, but as a whole, we are struggling to get decoders ourselves. So that is absolutely fine.
Yeah, we've had quite a lot of traders saying that they won't come to guild shows at the moment because they've got nothing to sell to people.
Yeah, that is very unfortunate. It's a little bit to do with the times, but hopefully some boffin somewhere will no doubt sort it out and get us back on track.
Okay. Ian, I know you've got a question that you want to share. Do you want to go ahead with that one?
Well, actually, Rupert Van Swol sent me a question via email, so I'd like to invite Rupert to unmute and ask his question directly if he would like to.
Lovely.
Hello, yes, greetings from the Netherlands.
Good evening, Rupert.
Hello. It's a question about a decoder file, what I received from your company.
Yep.
The difference between here on Europe, let's say the continental, my type of driving is completely computer-driven railroad model.
So something like the active drive, for instance.
Yes, and that gives me some. It's difficult to understand how it is working because there are lots of CV you have to change. Sometimes I can manage it with some help of Stephen Hübner from Zimo in Wenen, yes.
Okay.
And but then I lost some sound details. Most of the time it is the brakes, because the most bridges use very high CV values on CV3 and CV4.
Yep.
And I use very low ones because
the computer
the
control
drives the train, and otherwise I get no good stopping moment. I have no pinpoint stopping. But
yes.
how is the best way to manage that? I have to search for a certain level.
I mean, going forward, by all means, request, if you do get another file from us, request that it be a non-active drive sound file from us. We can obviously tailor the sound file then to have the whistles back on F2, things like that, as opposed to the braking options. We can also tailor things like the brake squeal to come on earlier without the activation of the braking key itself. And at the same token as well, we can also then adjust all the CV settings to obviously adapt to the computer control. Obviously, I understand things like iTrain and some other computer softwares. They tend to use their own speed curves to basically control and stop the engines. Obviously, that won't work with the the high values that we have in something like CV4, for instance. So yeah, we can certainly accommodate you. That's not a problem.
Okay, I'm still trying it. It's working now very good because it's running now on the track for 4 hours, and it is I use WinDigipad because every time the time I take an average. So the shortest the stop moments is a learning curve for the software by itself.
Yeah, so I mean, in your case, for instance, existing files, if you basically take 3 and 4 down to just a very low setting of something like 1, or even 5, that kind of thing, just to basically keep the computer more in control of your actual locomotive, as opposed to the decoder being in control of it.
Yeah, but then I have to break sound, have to adjustments, but I found already the CV that is regulated that, so I make the time.
Yeah, you get a break threshold setting.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and another point is I get a bad news from Stephen Hubber. The shortage for decoders is past on the end of 2024 over. I get it on my mail here.
I
can put it here maybe. I can see this. Now I can make a copy because it is very difficult, especially for the large decoders, because the MS950, that's what I use. But I'm lucky, I have now 4 in the box here. I get them from Denmark now. So.
No problem.
In England, is no decoder available anymore.
No, we are struggling for decoders. Even doing this install one, it was literally one that I knew I was going to need, so I had it sat aside for quite some time before I actually did the install work. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you, Rupert. Ian, I can't see chat from everyone for some reason.
There's no questions being posed in chat at the moment.
Okay, that's all right, then it maybe isn't just me. So if anybody's got questions, please do, just even if you type into chat, I have a question I'd like to ask, and then we can get you to unmute. Meantime, I'm totally novice. Technical is not my forte, as people will tell you quite happily. I'm very happy with buildings and scenics and all sorts of other things, but not doing the technical bits. So I wouldn't dream of even trying to actually fit a decoder myself. But what makes you decide the size of decoder that you're going to install? People talk about XLs. I'm just curious as to how you choose the right size for the locomotive.
Okay, that's a good question. The decoders themselves obviously tend to be favored for current draw. So things like we'll take on the XL, for instance, that's a 5 amp decoder. The L is only a 3 amp decoder. So depending on the model you've got, so a lot of the larger Helgen models that have the large twin motors in them, they will obviously require a large scale decoder. If you've got something like these a lot of kit built engines I see, they've got single motor, a good gearbox on them, that kind of thing. Generally you can get away with the smaller decoders because they're not going to draw as much current, being that they're only single motored. So that tends to be the sort of choice with it. I mean, we are seeing locomotives now like the Helgen Class 26 as an example. It basically has the XL pin type decoder. So it makes installation for yourselves a lot easier. You don't have to go through everything that you saw me do in the video. It's just a case of popping the body off, taking the blanking plate out and popping the decoder back in its place. And that makes the install work very easy for yourself and others that are maybe a bit inexperienced with it.
John, Richard Walker has just asked a question. What happens if your chip is too small?
So if the chip is too small and you exceed what's called the peak current of that particular chip, you can damage the decoder. So unfortunately you might even pop it to the extent that you get a small whiff of smoke and a component burnt on your decoder. So yeah, do bear that in mind when you're selecting your particular decoder. So as an example, if I take something like the MS450 Zimo decoder, they have a 1.5 continuous current draw and a 2.5 peak. So when you're choosing your decoder, it's a case of getting your locomotive, attaching it to something like your ammeter on a DC track or a DC power supply. And then what you're actually going to do is run the locomotive and physically, with your hands, stop the wheels from turning, stop the locomotive from moving, stop the wheels from turning. That is then going to display to you the maximum current draw that your locomotive will ever get, basically. And at that point, as long as you know you're in that boundary, you can select a smaller scale decoder, or if you're over it, then you know you need a larger scale one.
Good tip, thank you. There's a question from Tony saying, I mainly use Zimo decoders, which with active drive.
Yep.
What is the advantage of ESU decoders, and do they support active drive too?
So the Zimo decoder tends to be one we favor, because mainly a lot of our sound projects have been done with Zimo platform in mind. However, we are starting to move a lot of our sound projects and sound files over to the ESU platforms. So it's literally a case of preference, I think is probably the best way to put it. Some people favor Zimo, some people favor ESU. I find myself ESU a little bit harder to program with their indexing CVs. So for instance, if you want to make a change, you generally find you have to put in something CV31 to a value of 6, CV32 to a value of 14, and then you go for the particular CV that you wish to change. You don't find that with the Zimos. So I do find the Zimo a little bit easier CV wise to program over the ESU. And regards to the support of the ESU active drive, yes, they will support the active drive. In actual fact, the ESU decoders actually have 3 brake settings that you can implement into your function mapping. So you could have a brake setup for braking on F2, but you could also have an emergency brake release on another F key, and at that point it will brake a lot quicker and a lot faster than, say, the F2 key. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both decoders, basically.
I hope that's answered the question, Tony, and if not, do come back to us.
Yeah, by all means.
Andy has said, I have had to use ESU decoders in the latest Helgen Class 27, but would normally prefer Zimo. Is there any prospect of a Zimo XL decoder?
At this time, unfortunately, nothing at the moment. So the 950s are with us. We've got the 955, which is the next one up from the 950, and then we're going to the 995, I want to say, excuse me. Sorry, the 990, excuse me. And that will be their large scale decoder that Zimo will produce eventually. But nothing on the horizon with it. And as you've seen with the Class 27, you've got the pin type ESU decoder. There is the pin type option for the Zimo decoder as well.
Okay, I hope that answered the question, Andy. The next one is from Richard. Some folks are removing the second motor in Helgen locos, so are able to use effectively 00 decoders.
Correct, yes. By basically removing, I've seen it done on things like Class 20s, as an example, the Helgen Class 20. It's really simple and really quick to actually remove the motors from those. But yeah, you can basically reduce your current draw by only having the single motor. Obviously, you're reducing your pulling power, but at the same token, you're obviously you're stepping down to the smaller scale decoder, which, as we know, is more readily available. Excuse me.
So is that the reason they're doing it, is to actually make use of the more prolific supply of 00 decoders?
I would say so, yeah. Obviously, as I said before, you know, it's a case of you can the smaller motored. Let's try and put this into the smaller motor engines, for instance, like the Class 20, the earlier 26 that didn't have the ESU pin type, those kind of models, they have a smaller twin motor setup. So you can actually get adapter boards from Zimo. One's called an Adaplu, and there's an ADA MKL and MTC as well. And this also enables you to use the smaller scale decoder, but have a 1.8 amp current draw. So you can actually increase the amps that the small scale decoder will work to by adding this adapter board to it. That is a good workaround if you're struggling to get the XL decoders. However, I wouldn't recommend it on the larger motored models, for instance, things like the 37s, 47s, etc.
I'm just going to pause for a moment there because Tony's mentioned that the spotlight isn't on.
No, it is.
It is. Okay, that's all right. It is for me.
I was about to say it is for me too.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is for me now too as well. I got me set up wrong.
Well,
Okay.
while we've taken that brief pause, we have a question from whoever's joined us and identifying as iPhone in brackets 2. I have a second-hand loco with a stay alive fitted to the decoder. What is the best way to check the stay alive is working?
Well, the simple thing is basically leave it on the track for a good few minutes, just to let the stay alive get to its maximum charge. Put your sound on and lift it off the track. That is the very simple way to do it. If the obviously if the locomotive stops the second you lift it, then you know your stay alive isn't working.
Yeah.
Depending on the decoder as well, that could also be down to a setting in the decoder as well.
Rupert has also said, with the Helljan 2 engine models, should I pay extra attention to the motor setting?
If you're using the Zimo decoder, just let the Zimo decoder do its job. Basically, the motor drive on the Zimo decoder is very, very good. The ESUs, on the other hand, they don't tend to be right straight away out of the box, is probably the best way to explain them. So sometimes you do have to adjust things on them. They do have an auto tune setting, but things to be mindful of is let me explain the auto tune. So what you can do with the auto tune is you can set CV54 to a value of 0. And then what you'll basically do is place it onto the track with all your functions turned off. And the one thing I will stress is obviously make sure it's got a good clear run, because the second you press the F1 key, the locomotive will race off at quite an alarming rate. So do make sure you've got a good piece of clear track ahead of it, and obviously make sure your direction is going the right way as well. So obviously don't make sure your direction is not reverse, and then you've only got the clear run forward as well. But yeah, after it's done that, basically the sound will start up as normal, and then basically do have a play with your motor settings there. You'll probably find the locomotive will be a lot better on the creep at low speed. But the one thing I do tend to find more than anything is it does seem to cap the reference voltage, which is CV53. But by what it does is basically brings the motor voltage down. So you'll find things like your top speed might not be as great as it was before. So most people with end-to-end shunter layouts tend to prefer it low anyway. But people with garden railways where they've got a good long run around the garden, that kind of thing, and they like to send their 47 off at a good rate, I think you might need to adjust CV53 back up, and I would probably recommend don't exceed anything more than 130. What they do is they basically use 130 as 13 volt as an example. So 120 would be 12 volt. And if you said, for instance, 125, that's 12.5 volt as an example. So yeah, you may find you have to tweak those settings a little bit on the ESUs, but regards to the Zimo, I would say just let it do its thing. It does tend to auto tune itself very well as more you use it.
Okay, Richard Roden has asked, I'm almost a complete novice. Just built my first loco, a connoisseur starter 040 tank. Thanks, Jim. Noting the lack of decoder supply, is it possible to set up the electric system on the loco to accept a decoder when they become available? If so, what would I need to obtain?
So I'm guessing the model being a small little tank engine. Obviously you've got a single motor in there, and you're obviously using a gearbox that drives on axle onto your wheel sets. So in that sense, probably the easiest way to go about this would be an 8-pin harness, because you're not going to need one of the large scale decoders in that particular model, I don't feel. Obviously do check your current draw that we spoke about, get your multimeter again, and then you'll be able to just check the current draw of your actual model. And as I say, if you're not exceeding the sort of peak of 2.5, then you can look at installing an 8-pin harness into the model. So that way it's just a case of you put your 8-pin harness into the model, 2 wires to your pickups, 2 wires to the motor, and then that gives you the option to basically then put a blank plug onto the 8-pin harness. And at that point you'll be able to carry on running it on DC. But when you come to do the upgrade, it's just a case of then popping that blank out and popping the 8-pin decoder in its place.
Brilliant, thank you, Charles.
It's no problem.
There's a message from Steve Hoser as well. Have you any experience of the American Soundtracks decoders? I found it very difficult to set up.
The honest answer to that is unfortunately not. Soundtracks is a brand that we don't carry anymore. We found them too difficult to get into the country. I do know people that I can suggest. If you'd like to drop me a message at work, then I can obviously suggest those particular individuals that you can get hold of to accommodate the soundtrack settings.
That's helpful. Is that okay, Steve?
So yeah, if you drop me an email, johng@digitrains.co.uk, then I can forward you. I can point you in the right direction for people that will know the settings for soundtracks.
Right, I think I know the guy because I bought one recently. My question is, it seems to be a totally different concept. Whereas we, for steam locos, buy a decoder for a particular steam loco, the American one there is one steam decoder. It has 83 different whistles, if I remember rightly.
Correct.
Unfortunately, 81 are for American locos. I bought one because I wanted a variable speed Westinghouse pump on it, but I don't think it was a very good buy.
Right. Are these the EcoNami ones by any chance?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So the EcoNami, it's a case of having had a little play with something like the 21-pin UK Steam versions and stuff like that. They are a little bit problematic to get the CV settings correct. And sometimes I tend to find that when you change one CV setting for a particular whistle, all of a sudden, oh, that's not doing what it was doing 5 minutes ago. So
yeah.
So yeah, so I do kind of understand your frustration a little bit.
Okay, I'll say no more. I haven't really managed to get it to coast properly. I've got the whistle okay.
Yep.
On the basis that if anyone thinks it's wrong, show me the evidence, and I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I mean, coasting as a whole, you'll tend to be looking at sort of your CV4 at high values anyway. The higher the number, obviously, the longer it will take to adjust to that particular speed setting that you've set your controller to. They also have the braking option as well, which, if I remember correctly, they've got it on something like F12 or something like that, I think it is. But again, I'm not sure if you can move that or not.
You can do some function mapping, but not everything.
Yeah.
And being a totally different thing, it's quite difficult to set up. But I'll shut up because it seems I'm probably not the only one interested. Thanks.
That's fine, Steve. No problem.
Any more questions?
Yeah, Peter has just asked, it is possible to make an 8-pin DCC harness using an 8-pin DIL socket. The spacing between the 2 rows of 4 is 0.1 inch, apparently.
Yeah, that's a good tip. You can generally get them on a kind of, I want to say like a sprue, but that's probably the wrong word. And then you can basically just cut the length down to size to suit, basically.
You can buy them as strips, but
Yeah.
I use just ordinary if they don't fall on my head. I just use these.
Sorry,
You won't be able to see them because he's.
You can't-
hang on, Peter. I'll just scroll through and I'll just quickly find it there. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I use these. They're just ordinary 8-pin dill sockets,
Yeah,
and you cut the bit in the middle out, and that
Yeah.
gives you the exact spacing.
yeah, no problem. Handy tip though, but yeah. So
Yeah. Well, I have loads of these.
Thank you for that, Peter.
no problem. We've lost the spotlight. What's happened?
Yeah, I'm trying to actually just remove, I put Peter on so everybody could see what he had in his hands. And you should be back as spotlight now, is that correct?
Not at the moment, no.
Still spotlit for me.
He spotlit for me.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
And me.
Maybe that's just my settings then. Hang on.
could be. Yeah.
Let's go there. Sorry, that's better. I've sorted it out now.
Going back to Zimo chips, John. Obviously they're moving over to the MS series now.
Correct.
Is it? I mean, it's just basically the increase in the audio quality on the MS series Zimos,
Yeah.
is it? More than
Yes.
anything.
Pretty much. Obviously, we are making new sound files to obviously accommodate these new abilities with these new decoders. So generally, when you go on our website, if you see a ZS, it's the sort of standard MX 8-bit 22 kilohertz audio quality, that kind of thing. If you see the new branded MS sound files, so we've got things like Black Fives and lots of new 3-cylinder LNER stuff as well. I went and did a little recording with Sir Nigel Gresley, so that was a good fun day out for me. But yeah, so if you see an MS branded, that's making use of full 16-bit 44 kilohertz audio quality. So strongly do recommend that if you're going for an MS chip, see if you can get an MS file to go with it, because then you're getting the full advantage of that particular decoder.
Thank you.
No problem.
You've
So
just touched on something there that I was going to ask, and that's about how do you get the best sound recording in the first place? I mean, you were talking about going off and spending time with Sir Nigel Gresley.
Yeah.
How do you first start thinking about setting up new sound?
So recordings as a whole, we're quite convenient in the sense that a lot of our original recordings that we did for the MX were done at a higher quality. So even though they didn't support, the MX range didn't support the 16-bit audio at the time, we're quite fortunate in the sense that they were done at a higher quality to start with, so we can adapt the existing files to be used with the MS range. Regards to going and actually physically recording a new file, it's a case of obviously we have to go and get permission from the certain railway company, or in some cases the owner of the particular locomotive. Obviously with that in mind, we then set about sort of attaching. I mean, I use a Zoom H4. I'll just quickly hang on.
One I made earlier.
Ignore the man
Yeah,
behind
so
the curtain.
This is one. Yeah, my assistant behind there just sounded it to me. No. So no, this is one of my smaller ones. So this is my little Zoom H4 handy recorder. It's quite useful in the sense that you can tuck this away quite conveniently, and generally doesn't spoil the look of a locomotive as well, because some people do obviously get quite upset when they see a large boom mic or something like that stripped to the side of their locomotive, that kind of thing. But yeah, so generally sort of sensing things like when I went and did Gresley, my main task was getting decent whistles. So I was quite fortunate in the sense that, well, getting decent whistles, I can do it from a first coach recording actually, as opposed to sitting this on the side of the actual locomotive or anything. So yeah. There we are.
Okay, interesting. It's one of those things that you always imagine. People talk about, oh, that chip's got really great sound, and other ones are less so. And it's obviously down to the original recording, isn't it? So
yeah, obviously we're quite fortunate, as I said, but obviously there are people that obviously are still using older recordings and all this kind of stuff. But to get the full advantage out of these decoders, you need to get the audio quality to start with. So
I suppose as well with that, it's the choice of speaker and speaker location within your locomotive as well, isn't it?
that's also very important. Yes, glad you touched on that actually, because obviously you could have a brilliant sound file on your decoder, but if you've got a inferior or rubbish or not powerful enough speaker, then obviously you're going to lose a lot of that quality through a bad speaker choice or bad speaker install. So yeah.
In terms of speaker installs, the one thing I find personally quite frustrating is the size of the tabs on the speakers themselves. So actually, you've got to solder a wire onto. They all seem quite flimsy. Do you think that's quite indicative of the speakers we're using?
Well, at the end of the day, we're using miniature speakers at the end of the day, so we're not using nice big sort of audio speakers that we can generally find in our home audio systems, that kind of thing. I mean, the most important thing I tend to find with speakers more than anything is enclosing them. It's quite easy to put a speaker into just a hole somewhere where this speaker will make a noise, but the important thing is making it airtight on one side of the speaker. The reason you're doing that is basically it's like basically talking through a wall. If there's a door open between the wall, then you can hear the conversation from both sides of the wall. If the door is shut, you can't hear that conversation. So in that sense, by making your speaker airtight, at least on one side of it, you're obviously not going to get that sort of communication between the two sides of the speaker, and that obviously increases your sound quality and your actual level, your sound level as well.
Any more questions? Do type them into chat or just pop a note in saying, please, can I unmute and ask a question? I know sometimes typing it in, especially if it's complicated, is quite difficult.
Richard Walker has just asked, how do we make it airtight?
Right, okay. Simple way I can basically do it is show you just with a smaller unit, for instance. You can get little 3D printed boxes. I don't know how well that's coming across on the screen, but that is a little tiny 18 millimeter by 13 millimeter sugar cube box. And basically I can take the 18mm driver and install it onto a box like so, and that's basically glued around the actual gasket of the speaker itself, and that's basically making an airtight seal for that speaker to work in. So a lot of the particular speakers that we have at Digitrains, for example, we do a nice little, trying to remember the size of it, 42 by 30 by 17, or we do a 13mm version as well. And that comes in a resin printed 3D printed box, basically, so the actual airtight seal is done for you. The particular speaker I use in this install that you guys watch the video on, that's one of the Owl Sounds speakers I've just mentioned there, the 42 by 30 by 17, excuse me. And I've basically gone with that speaker because I know it's a good driver, it's a good airtight seal. You'll also notice I've actually placed it inside the body as opposed to using the original speaker location underneath in the tank. The main reason for doing that is obviously having an airtight speaker inside a sort of body of volume, basically. Again, that's also going to increase your sound level and quality as well, because the speaker's got an actual chamber to work in.
That's useful, because Steve Hothers said, I find it makes a big difference to sound quality if you can put the speaker in the smoke box.
Yes, so if you've got a chamber for the actual speaker to work in as well, that's going to increase your audio level.
Yeah, the smoke box like that will act as a Helmholtz resonator.
Correct, yes.
Improve certainly the mid-range of whatever speaker you're using.
Very useful. John and Christine Walker, I have been reading recently about Hornby's HM7000 Bluetooth support. Are the mainstream decoder manufacturers developing this?
The honest answer to that question is I wouldn't know. I don't work for Zimo or ESU, unfortunately. I suspect there will be advances in that sort of field. You know, Hornby are certainly not the first people to do the Bluetooth decoders. In actual fact, Soundtracks a few years back did the Balloon Army, which was another version as well that did that. I mean, the honest answer to that is we'll wait and see, is the honest answer. Yeah.
Okay. And then Rupert has just said, can I still add sound to a Zimo ZPP/crypt project? I have from ScotRail a sound stand for the platform broadcaster.
Yep.
With WavePad, I paste those single pieces to the sound file.
Right. The honest answer is I would need to check that if it can be done on there's a tool that they supply on their website, which is called ZPP config. And that lets you change all the CV settings in that encrypted file. Obviously, you can't change or alter any of our existing files, but what you can do, providing the decoder has the space, that's going to be the next problem. As long as you've got the space in there to be able to do it, you can add sounds to that ZPP and basically put them in as a sound slot into your F keys on that decoder.
Does that answer it for you, Rupert?
As I said, I'd need to check. I think I would need to check if I can do it with a CRIPE file, which as daft as it sounds, I can actually do here.
I think it is it is. I think it was not available. I have to wait to the next firmware update. When it is number 5, then I can add sound to a crypt file. Because I'm not sure.
Let me just try it quickly. I've got a class 20 here, so I can chuck that in there. Bear with me. This is the handy thing, having my home setup. So this looks like I can. Hang on. Doing this live on camera. Sorry.
I like the voice of ScotRail. There's a nice woman that speaks a little bit Scottish.
While you're doing that, John, John Walker has said, I like my speakers to face the track so that the sound is reflected widely, and it is not so easy to detect where the sounds are coming from. And I think I would agree with that as well. I'd go along with that.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be a personal preference.
Yeah.
Sound is one of those things that is quite personal. What generally I might think is good sound, someone might sit there and say they don't like it, that kind of thing. Obviously, if you're fitting it inside the body of a locomotive, obviously it's going to escape from apertures, fan grills, the exhaust ports, that kind of thing. So yeah, you know, that's going to give you a more directed kind of sound in terms of that. Facing them down, as you say, you've obviously got the advantage of having the sound thrown at a wider sort of field, because it's basically going down onto a hard surface that throws it out every direction. The only thing I would sort of stipulate, again, with putting speakers and larger speakers underneath models, is obviously you run the risk of picking up little track pins or anything metal that's been left on the track or anything like that at a time as well. So do be mindful of that as well.
Oh, this is looking like a large question.
I'm in.
Right. From Steve Bannister. Shall I do this one, Jackie, or do you want to go for it?
Please carry on.
Okay. Steve Bannister has put a nice long package together. Thank you, Steve. He says, I have dipped my toe into DCC over the last 6 months. The first locos I have tried were a Southern Railway G6060 and a Southern Railway 700 class 060. Both have standard Mishima motors with 40:1 etched gearboxes and have run very smoothly and reliably on DC. I fitted inexpensive drive-only decoders but found that the maximum speed was halved to an unacceptable level, even allowing for the goods roll of these locomotives. After a lot of inquiry and experimentation with various CVs, with help from club members, I set the locos on the test track on DC to the maximum speed attained on DCC, and was surprised to find the track voltage was 12 volts. It seems the DC controller was delivering well over 12 volts to the locos at greater speeds, up to 18 volts.
Mhm.
This must be the case on several layouts the locos have appeared on in the past. The AC on most DCC systems will not deliver these voltages, so I have concluded I need to change the gear ratios on these locos, and I'm hoping desperately this will not be the case for the rest of my stock. Any views, help, or comments, and has anyone else found this problem? That's quite a good one, because I know that certainly the group that I'm involved with Peter Reynolds, who's joined us this evening, the controllers that he built have got more than 12 volts on the track. I think there's 16, 18 volts now with Peter on occasion. So there are probably quite a lot of controllers that people use that are putting out more than 12 volts DC.
This goes back to a previous question. Your decoder actually has a reference voltage that it can basically supply the motor with. So if that reference voltage is set to a lower setting, for instance 8 volts, obviously you're not going to gain the best maximum speeds out of your locomotive. What the reference voltage is doing is it's basically enabling the decoder to pulse a maximum voltage to the decoder to keep the rotation of the motor going at low speeds. Obviously, if you set this too low, then you're going to lose top speed from your model, that kind of thing. So depending on what decoder he's got, he might have a CV that he might need to change just to increase that reference voltage, and that should hopefully get the speed back up on his model.
Steve, would you like to unmute and give us some more information if you can?
I know Steve's added that one of the controllers was a helmsman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, the thing that I can't quite understand about, the suggestion there is that if I need 18 volts, say, to get my locos going at what I previously thought was a reasonable top speed for this type of loco, is there any way that a decoder that's receiving an AC voltage from the track of the order, I don't know what they all are, but they're all about 14, 15, 16 volts AC.
Yep.
If you rectify that, you're not going to get 12 volts, more than 12 volts, and certainly not 18 volts, so there's a basic physics issue there, I thought, rather than just changing a decoder that allows
as I said, it could be down to a setting in the decoder. Obviously if you've got a large current draw on the motor, that kind of thing as well, obviously that's going to have an effect on it as well. Gearbox, obviously that's going to slow things up, obviously, as you've stipulated that obviously your DC side of it was working better, or working quicker, excuse me, without the decoder in situ. So yeah, I mean, what decoder is it by any chance? I might be
one of the rails of Sheffield, inexpensive, but they're about 20 odd quid, 25 quid, drive only, 3 amp decoder.
Yeah, I would say give them a call and maybe see if there's a CV setting that you can change for the reference voltage. Obviously, if there's an issue. So
do you think that having, if they do have that CV and it's changed appropriately, it will then deliver 14, 15 volts out of the decoder to the loco?
I wouldn't say go that high, especially if it's a Machima 12-volt motor. Obviously stick within the sort of maximum voltage that motor is capable of. This is the other thing. Obviously, we read it as an AC voltage, and a lot of people pick it up as an AC meter, and they'll put it on their track and all this sort of stuff. But basically, it's a DC sine wave. So in terms of trying to rectify it and all this sort of stuff, we're not actually rectifying an AC voltage, we're actually rectifying DC sine waves. That's the way the digital signal works, and there's a pulse. It's the pulse width that basically sends the information and the data.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like there might be a chance there, but
Yeah, by all means, drop me, if you like to drop me an email at Digitrains, johng@digitrains.co.uk. I can do some digging around and see if I can find a CV setting or something like that that's worth a try.
all right.
The
Thank you very
other thing
much.
you have to be careful of with motors as well is the stated figures from the manufacturer sometimes are well under what the motor is capable of taking. So the Maxon coreless motors, for example, you might see a 6-volt Maxon motor, but it's quite happy running at 12 volts and will happily run at 12 volts all day, even though it's sold as a 6-volt motor.
Yeah, and I mean the main controllers I've used, and there's certainly one on the Southampton test circuit, is a Helmsman, and you know that's obviously churning out up around the 18 volts mark, up to that if you need it. And
Yeah,
the machine,
I mean,
there's several Machima locos, not just mine, that chug around that perfectly okay at well above 12 volts by the sound of it, judging from my experience.
I mean, I use 18 volts on this 00 setup that you see around me here. You know, I'm not using 18 volts through my actual locomotives or my motors or anything like that. The decoders are obviously powered by that particular unit. So.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I'll have a look, and then I'll drop you a line if
Yeah, if you get stuck, by all
find
means,
any.
I'm happy to help as best I can. No problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers, Dave.
Thank you, John.
So can I just mention that the controllers that Ian mentioned that we have at the SR7 mil group, they're unregulated, so they give 18 odd volts open circuit with nothing on them, but as soon as you load them, the voltage falls to about 14 or 15 volts, and that whereas DCC, it's actually doing its own regulation on the chip, so you're getting a much sort of smooth.
You're getting a regulated cap, is what
you're getting a well, yeah, that's what the CV does. It sets the regulated cap that's delivered to the motor. One other thing, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a Q6 that I'm building. And what I've done is I've used a bit of scrap etch to actually make a shelf in the smoke box to put the speaker on.
So that will sound pretty good in that.
I hope that it will. It's what, at least it's one that there is a genuine one around, unlike the A8 I made where I had to I actually used a school's sound file for it.
Yeah, we've got a nice Q6 sound set as well, actually.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a nice prototype.
Good.
Okay, I've got another question here from Andy's iPad. I've had that problem with low speeds, and I found changing to a higher voltage power supply made a big difference with my NCE power CAD.
I mean, I would never recommend deviating from a sort of manufacturer's set voltage supply. You know, obviously the power cab itself is a 2-amp system, and the power supply that comes with it is a 13.8 volt power supply. Obviously that's going to be a case of, if you wish to increase that power supply, I mean, I would be looking at things like the SB5, which is the 5-amp booster that they do, and that has 2 voltage settings, etc. You can get boosters as well. We provide a Tam Valley booster unit from work. You can quite happily use that on a 15-volt power supply. And then basically all your NCE power cab is effectively doing is providing a DCC signal to a larger booster to then run your railway. And at that point, you're obviously getting a higher voltage that way as well.
Can I just unmute and explain what I meant by that comment?
Yep.
Of course.
So basically, I had a power cab, as you said, it's 13 point something power supply that comes with the power cab.
Yeah.
I've got the Tam Valley booster, and that made a bit of difference, but didn't really increase the top speed.
Yeah.
I then plugged in the DCC Concepts upgrade, which is an 18-volt power supply designed specifically for the NCE power cab.
Yeah.
So I assumed it was all right because it said it was designed for the power cab.
Yeah.
And the difference was fundamental. It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It took my locos from being chugging at much slower speeds than they were on DC to being just about the same as they used to be on DC.
Is that just the alpha power unit into the power cab, or
No,
is
it's not alpha power. It's
alpha
it's
box?
18. It's about a 20 quid out, maybe 30 quid, 18-volt power supply. So it's just a plug with
Right.
with the sort of non-wall plug-in terminal on it that you plug into the back of the power cab
Panel, the
socket.
PCB panel, yeah.
Yes. So it's not the alpha power unit that's a 5 amp unit, because I've got the
Yeah.
Tam Valley booster already, which was cheaper, and I thought was already doing the job that I needed.
Yeah.
So it's just a 20 or 30 quid power supply that they provide, specifically designed for the power cab, and it made a huge difference to the top speed of my locos.
Yeah,
Such that
obviously you're going to be getting the decoder itself will be able to supply a higher voltage to the motor. So again, subject to the motor settings that you've got on your decoder, for instance, you can put the Zimo as an example, you can set say V57 to a value of 0, and whatever the track voltage is the maximum voltage it will give you to the motor. So in that sort of sense, you can get much higher speeds and much more quicker abilities. The only thing I would stipulate is obviously I would certainly have a look at the manufacturer's blurb, manuals, etc., to obviously ensure that obviously the power cab is capable of running with that sort of power through it. That would be the one thing I would stress.
Yeah, from memory, the power cab instructions say you can supply it with any power voltage from 12 to 18, and it will reduce by 2 at the track level.
Right,
That's sort of my rough memory of what it said.
Yeah,
but it certainly seemed to work.
Good. Yep.
Okay, another one from Tony. I have a really heavy scratch-built J72 with a Machima 1833 attached to an ABC gearbox.
Yep.
I use a 2A TCS chip without sound and would like to replace it with a Zimo sound chip. What do you suggest, particularly in view this is a small loco?
645.
So, I mean, that particular chip, I mean, if it's running comfortably on one of the TCS 2 amp chips, you could probably look at something like the, I was going to quote the MX645R or the MS450R. The MS is obviously the newer chip and they're the more readily available one. The 645 will be a little bit hit and miss with regards to it. But so MS450R, you could look at that sound chip, and that's basically got a 2.5 peak, a 1.5 continuous current running on your motor. So that would be fine in that particular for instance, excuse me.
John, Rupert has come back with another comment stroke question. I think it's going back to what we were just discussing regarding track voltages. He says, so if I understand correctly that the reference for each DCC coder is the track voltage adjustable on your command station, the track voltage of each DCC command station must always be between 10 volts and 24 volts, so defined in the DCC standard. And as your track gauge stroke scale, you set the recommended track voltage for that track. So the smallest gauge, Z, you have 10 to 11 volts track voltage. Then for slightly larger N or TT, you have 12 to 14 volts set. For HO gauge, you usually have around 16 volts set in the command post. And for the larger scales, what you have, i.e. 7 mil, you usually have something between 18 volts and 24 volts set. Has he got the right figures there? I mean, is he basically right regarding that?
That's pretty correct. Obviously, the larger scales tend to run higher track voltages. Higher voltage mean obviously less amps drawn through the actual DCC system. So obviously that's going to help your larger layouts to be able to basically run without exceeding the maximum ampage that's capable for the DCC system itself. The DCC system's only ever going to give you what's required of it in terms of ampage, but obviously you can adjust the voltage, and then by increasing the voltage, you're then reducing the amps as well. So.
Thank you. Is that okay for you, Rupert? Brilliant.
Thumbs up,
Thank you. Yeah, thumbs up. Good. Do we have any more questions from anyone at this time? Everyone seems to be quite happy not asking questions tonight, of those, apart from those that have, of course. In terms of the advancements being made in DCC decoders at the moment, where do you see us going, say, in 10 years' time with DCC decoders or DCC chips? You got any thoughts on what might be, what might come up for us in the future?
Well, obviously, depending on how much you look at the American market and that kind of thing, obviously you can look at things like TCS, for instance. They're producing a new LLC, which is basically layout command control.
Right.
So that's going to be the next kind of evolution of DCC. So we've got DCC at the moment, which is basically standardized everything to and from the track.
Yeah.
So basically the signal to the track and the signal from the track is all standardized and set by DCC. At the moment, depending on your DCC system that you're using, you tend to be either catered into LocoNet or ExpressNet, S88. Again, depending on what system you're doing, you tend to find that you're kind of stuck with that particular kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here, protocol or communication protocol, that kind of thing. But the idea of LCC, excuse me, is to try and standardize on all those units across the actual manufacturers. So basically we'll be able to take one unit from one manufacturer and one unit from another manufacturer, and they will work together. It's an interesting idea, I think. I don't know how many manufacturers will jump on board with this. But that is probably going to be the next big thing that's out there. And as I say, do have a look at on TCS themselves. They've got quite an interesting little side of it. There are other manufacturers that do produce some LCC units already, and there are adapters that you can get already that basically convert existing systems to use with the LCC side of things as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to have a look at that. Because I'm still fairly, even though I've got an NC power cap system a good few years ago, courtesy of Jackie's husband John saying, "Oh, you want to buy one of these?" Other friends of mine, specifically, Peter Reynolds, who's here with us, went the whole log and went down a DigiKeys system with, all sorts of, laptop control stuff. And I know others are now using laptops and tablets for driving their own DCC systems. But it just seems that there's just a plethora of different options available. And if you're just starting out in DCC, it's what do you actually go for as a system? And I know you would go for something that appeals to you in terms of ergonomics and operatability and also functions. But where do you start? If you're a complete beginner, where do you come into this?
I mean, the first thing I would always stress to anyone that's starting out is actually come and have a play with DCC systems. As you said there, I mean, I use the DR5000 myself on my own layout, and I'm basically JMRI, computer controlled tablet Mimic. I can grab one to show you. But
under the curtain now.
Under the curtain now, yeah. But the point I'm making is basically it's a case of what system is best for me might not be best for yourself. So obviously this is a larger sort of side of a more advanced kind of side of things. I say that and I need to boot up my layout. Hang on. You'll hear all the noises and signal box sounds and all sorts in a second, so do bear with me. Of course, it's going to run slow for me tonight, isn't it? But no, I mean, certainly, things like, oh, bear with me a sec. Just let everything boot up. Sorry, have we lost me, or are we okay? Or?
No, we're waiting for you, John.
Yep,
we're all sat here. Yeah, on tenterhooks.
Yeah, so, sorry, do excuse all the noises. So all the points going to a setup and that sort of thing. So I would always stress, come and have a go, for instance, at the shop. in Lincoln, we've got a big demo layout in the middle of the shop where you can basically come and have a play with all the different DCC systems out there. You know, as I stress, what's good for me might not be good for somebody else, and it's that personal kind of side of it. That's always the side I try and look for when I'm selling someone a new DCC system or someone that's starting out. It's a case of what are you used to, what sort of bits are you, what kind of things are you looking for? Are you looking for a console base? Are you looking for a handheld? That kind of thing. And, you know, with the right sort of set of questions, we can get you, you know, to a system, let you have a play with it, see if you like it. If it's not that one, then we can move on to the next one and see which one you prefer yourself. So as I was saying, for instance, my whole system here. I literally have a screen there that basically gives me 2 throttles, and then my whole layout you can see down here. So basically I can zoom in on points of that layout, and then basically by pushing, that's changed my crossover on my station, which is just up here in front of me.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, it's not for everyone. That's the point I'm trying to stress. It's a case of, you know, come and have a play, come and have a go, that sort of thing. I mean, I control all my points digitally. Some people might prefer to do them analog. Old sort of array of switches. I know certain manufacturers used to do these little levers that you could get. Some people like making a full sort of suite of those levers in front and having like a little signal box set up, that kind of thing. But yeah, you know, obviously, you know, you're going to be swayed by a lot of people. This is the system I use, have a go with this, that kind of thing, or I'd get this, I'd get that. But as I say, the one thing I would probably stress is have a play with your own system, have a play with a multitude of different systems and see which one suits you best.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, John basically grabbed me by the arm at one of the East Anglia shows that Jackie and St News used to organise a few years ago, and you know, strong-armed me to Digitrains stand and said, "Here you go, speak to the guys, tell them what you want."
I mean, the Power Cab is a hugely popular system. It's quite intuitive, it's quite easy to get on with. I mean, the other system I find quite good at the moment is the Digitrack Zephyr. 2 very different systems. One's a console based, one's a handheld. So it gives you that kind of scope to have a play with it. There are advantages and disadvantages to both systems. But again, it's, you know, if you are a DC modeler at the time, you're used to coming back to a controller on your desk, that kind of thing. So the console system might be more suited for you. But if you're fresh out of the box, you want something handheld in your hand, wireless, that kind of thing. It's personal preference. That's the thing.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thank you, John. I think Richard Walker has said anywhere south, but I think he's referring to, is there anywhere in the south of England that you could go and check different systems?
I mean, there are other companies out there as well. That Boeing Wings, you can go and have a little go. There's people down south, sort of Somerset way. You've got DCC train automations. You've got AGR models, Leighton Buzzard. That, you know, there's lots of different places around to have a play with these systems, that sort of thing. And the other thing is you can always drop us an email, give us a phone call. We can talk it through with you. And at the same token as well, do have a look at our YouTube as well, because our social media guy, Dave, he's the general manager of the place actually, but he tends to do a lot of videos, little how-to videos showing you the systems in detail, as a little sort of how-to guides, you know, how to do resets on your locos using the Power Cab, the Zephyr, that kind of thing. So he's getting quite active with those at the moment. He's just doing the Zephyr one at the moment. But yeah, it's always a case of have a little look around, have a little shop around, that kind of thing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. You got 2 thumbs up from Richard there for that. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay.
Rupert's asked another one there as well. Lockstore Digital has come out with the booster that can drive 20 amps. Personally, I prefer to use smaller boosters up to 5 amp, but then multiple boosters in different power circuits. How do you look at the high Vernigen?
I think that's version, Jackie.
Sorry, booster.
So
Power booster.
yeah, obviously I saw this. I went to a digital open day actually down south actually, and I got to meet the actual chaps who developed the lock store digital systems actually. And those sort of boosters have been designed with the G-scale stuff in mind, mainly the G-scale American stuff. That obviously they're big sound systems in them, big smoke units that absolutely bellow lots of plumes of smoke out of them and everything, but they're all high amp stuff. You know, compared to what some of the models that we've got over here, the O gauge ones as an example, even the twin motor ones, I'd be surprised if some of them see 3, maybe even 4 amp at a peak. You know, these G-scale things, you know, even when they're just sat idling of 5 amps, just because they're bellowing plumes of smoke out of them, that kind of thing. I mean, regards to sort of the high amps, I would be a little bit cautious around high amp booster systems, because at the end of the day, when your loco, for instance, short on a bit of point work or something like that, that power, that ampage has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, that's going through your loco, that's going through your decoder inside your loco. So be mindful, obviously, that if your decoder's only something like the little smaller 00 scale kind of decoders, like the DAPL, a lot of the DAPL locos are coming with the 21 pins in mind. You know, they're only rated for 2.5 amp. So yeah, it's a bit of a dangerous game. I mean, I use 2 3 amp boosters myself. I have a 3 amp that basically controls the main line on my railway, and then I have a 3 amp section for my MPD over there, mainly because it has a lot of locos in it at one time. That kind of thing. So I would always favor splitting the layout up into smaller sections, with smaller power districts, smaller ampage power districts, excuse me, as opposed to one large power supply to run the whole entire layout. If you do go down that option, though, there's nothing to stop you doing that. You can break the layout up into districts. You can get sort of multi-way district cutout units that you can set individual amp cutouts. So you've got the option there of using a high ampage DCC system, but at the same token, you're breaking it up into smaller districts, and you can have cutouts of 3 amp across 4, 5, 6 districts, that kind of thing.
If you were building a smallish, say, engine shed layout or a shunting layout, would you still have power districts?
No, would probably be my answer to that. I have a small layout myself, byway MPD. It's a little 4'6" by 1 foot layout. It has a couple of sidings and 3 points on it.
That's in 00, is it, John?
That's in 00, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's on a 2 amp controller. And it's basically a case of that just controls itself on one district, that kind of thing.
Right.
The reason for sort of breaking up districts on larger layouts, I would say, I'll certainly pick on the advantage of having an accessory bus.
Yeah.
As an example, you've got your main DCC bus and you've got an accessory bus. Now, the major advantage with that is if you've got an accessory bus, you've got a separate bus that's not going to be knocked out by a locomotive shorting on a set of point work. The advantage with that is, especially on an exhibition layout, I think this is quite important. You run a point, you short the layout out, your track buses shut down. Usually you'd have to reach over, grab your locomotive, drag it back off the point, wait for the DCC system to reset, and then go and change your point. If you've got the separate accessory bus in place, it's a case of your track bus shuts down, but your accessory bus is still live. So you can change that point underneath the locomotive.
Mm.
The DCC system then resets, or sorry, the district then resets, excuse me, the track district then resets, and your loco continues. That way you avoid the hand of God situation where you're having to drag locomotives back and up and down your layout.
Very useful. Peter's just mentioned that he would be very nervous having 20 amps knocking around on a layout at 15 volts. That's 300 watts, exclamation mark.
It's a lot of power. Yeah, it's a heck of a lot of power.
It is a lot of power, and I certainly heartily endorse your thing about the separate accessory bus.
Mm.
Like you said, if you have a fault, you know, you've got everything to take into account if you haven't divided stuff up. So divide stuff up to start off with. It's easier to sort the problems out later.
Yeah, I mean, this particular layout here is divided into 4 districts. So that way, if I short a locomotive in my station, for instance, my MPD area is still live, still working. Same principle with the return loop that's all the way down the far end there. So yeah, certainly districts would be the sort of the power districts would be the sort of way I would sort of break that up.
One question from Rupert again. I use 2 Lodi boosters with 4 power districts.
Yep.
Each 2.5 amp stroke 18 volts.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sounds a great way of doing it to me.
One query from me. You talked earlier about the fact that some people choose to do DC stock control and DCC control of their points, etc. And other people will do DCC for the stock and then analog for the points, etc.
Yep.
What are the pros and cons of having one system for everything, or the split of DCC for the stock and DC for the points?
Okay. I always laugh at this kind of cameo thing where people turn around and basically say DCC is 2 wires. At the end of the day, you're basically going to you're not going to reduce the amount of wires that you need to control your point motor. Effectively, all you're doing is reducing the length of your wire. So if I had a solenoid point motor over there, for instance, it would be a case of I would have a DCC accessory decoder over there. I would still need the 3 wires from the accessory decoder to that point motor. But because I've then basically got the 2 wires of the DCC system going round from here in front of me all the way round, I've just got the 2 wire bus there. So instead of running the 3 wires all the way along, you can then basically splice into the 2 wires that will be going around the whole layout anyway. And that's basically effectively reducing the length of your wire. That's one of the major advantages to doing DCC point control over the analog side. Obviously, the analog side, I appreciate that people will understand a bit more. Obviously, the analog side's been around a very, very long time. I was an analog modder when I first started this. Years and years ago, back when I was probably about 12-year-old, if I'm honest, but yeah. Yeah, that's the sort of advantage with going the DCC route. You're still going to use the same amount of wires to do the job, but effectively you're shortening the length of those wires needed.
Yeah,
that's very helpful.
And the other advantage, of course, is you don't need any isolated sections, because all your locos are controlled independently, aren't they?
I couldn't go back, is the honest answer. There's no way I could go back to an analog layout with switches everywhere for isolating sections or anything like that. It's literally a case of you select the loco. You're not driving the track anymore. You are selecting the loco. DCC as a whole, it's a case of every single decoder in your locomotive will hear that command that you send out. But because it's not address number 60, as an example, it chooses to ignore it. Only the one loco that is address 60 will then go, I've just been told to move. So I
suppose the only disadvantage with DCC in that respect, though, is it's easier to have 2 locomotives or 2 trains moving into the same area
or the same point work.
Yeah, whereby DC you can't do that. In theory, you can only run into the back of another one. You can't have 2 colliding.
It's that kid moment, isn't it? Can we make them crash into each other?
Yeah.
Or that Adam's Family moment. I do like that episode, actually.
Rupert's just saying that it's now 22:15 over in Holland, so he's
blimey,
walk the dog. So makes me mindful of timing, because we always say try and finish by 9:30. Do we have any?
If you're still there, Rupert, thank you.
I did send a message saying thank you for joining us. Any other questions from everybody? I just want to unspotlight John for a moment, and then I can actually just run
Getting
through.
used to looking at myself now.
Well, now we get to
Like
see
a mirror.
everybody.
Yeah, we get to see some boats now.
What I was going to do is just, while you're thinking about whether there are any final questions, is just to quickly run through some final slides to tell you what comes next month. So I'll just share the slides and go to slideshow from the start. So hopefully everybody can see the screen in front of us now.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you, John, and all of the Digitrains team, because I know David helped with recording the video of you actually installing the decoder. And as you've mentioned very, very kindly, your email address there is johng@digitrains.co.uk. I hope I've got that correct for you.
Yeah, that's correct. Happy to help any way I can, that sort of thing. David is much better at video editing than myself. So yeah, obviously, it was a case of he edited it all up and then I had to put my voice over it, which it was quite impressed I managed to do in nearly one take actually. So, but there we go. I'm more a kind of sit down and do what we're doing now. I do it live on YouTube, on my own YouTube channel. So yeah, I do a bi-weekly kind of live stream from in here, chasing locos around the layout with multiple cameras, etc. So that's more this is more what I'm used to, sitting down doing things live. So there we go.
We're very, very grateful, and thanks to obviously Nicole and Jeremy for permitting you to do it, so to speak. They were very supportive.
Not a problem.
Jackie.
Hello.
Yeah, Andy Sparks has decided to ask another question.
Okay, I'll come back. I'll just
Okay.
go through this, and then if anybody's got final questions, we'll
Sure.
come. For people joining us next month, and I know we have some regular viewers, our next evening with is planned for Saturday, the 26th of August, and we're actually going to be joined by Rob Anderson from Northumbria Painting Services, who does an awful lot of wargaming modelling, as well as obviously the figures that they sell from Northumbria Painting Services. And he's going to talk to us about techniques for actually painting O-gauge figures. Figure painting has all sorts of different techniques, lots of different ways of doing it. Do you undercoat? What color undercoat do you use? So it'll be really refreshing to have somebody who's doing this on a regular basis in not just model railways, but also wargaming, to tell us their techniques. Booking for that will start at midnight tonight, and full joining instructions will be sent out to you when you sign up for the session. And there will be a video which will get sent out about the techniques that Rob uses as well. Our next big show, Guildex Stafford 2023, 2nd and 3rd of September. And obviously we're in Bingley Hall at Stafford Showground again. This year we're doing one-day tickets for members at £10 for members, £15 for the public, and two-day tickets for members, £15, £20 for public. And that was something that people requested, was that they could have the option of buying a one-day ticket or a two-day ticket. Don't forget that all of our tickets are family tickets, because in effect, the purchaser can then bring a partner and any children under the age of 16. We've got masses of free parking up in Stafford, plus transfers from the railway station, which are complimentary. We've got 9 layouts, including Kimble, which is a very big continuous running layout as requested by members. It's something we couldn't get and fit in or have post-COVID last year. But by popular request, we're having a big layout which will have continuous running. There's 2 test tracks, one for live steam and one for not just 7mm, but also narrow gauge, and lots of demonstrators. I think we've got 9 demonstrations, 4 seminars going on, several society stands. And we are going to actually be building live a small O-gauge layout during the weekend. Pico will be supplying track, and many other traders are supplying off-the-shelf components to prove that if you want to upscale from 00, hint, hint, John, or If you're somebody who's looking,
But that's me scaling down from 5-inch gauge.
oh, true. Scale down as well. No, you have both. Believe me, you have both. But no, there are lots of people who do think still that you have to have a huge number of skills, lots of money, and loads of space to have a no gauge layout. And we want to prove to people that you can buy things off the shelf, put a layout together, and then if you see that really nice Dapple 08 that you've been lusting after for a while, you can get it running fairly quickly. To find out more about the event, if you just go to the front page of the Guild website and click on the GuildX poster there, the little thumbnail in the corner, it will take you to the page which we're keeping up to date that lists all the layouts, all of the demonstrations, all the traders who are attending, and you can buy advance tickets there. By midnight tonight, John's picture will disappear and Rob's picture will arrive, so that's your booking icon as well for next month. And just to remind you that if you are buying advance tickets, your name will go into the draw. L-Cut Creative are celebrating 10 years of business and kindly donated £100 vouchers to spend on L-Cut products. We had 2 winners at Kettering, 2 at Kempton, 2 at Barnsley, and there'll be 4 winners at GuildX. 2 names will be pulled out of the 1-day purchase hat and 2 from the 2-day hat. So you've got opportunities whether you're buying a 1-day ticket or a 2-day ticket to actually go in the prize draw. And finally, we have had some non-members join us this evening. We do a free trial of membership benefits, so that you can actually sign up and get, you know, the online version of the Gazette, which is our big quarterly magazine, access the knowledge base, which is called the Wiki, see all the traders, product directories, get to the YouTube channel and the gallery and see all the forthcoming events, and actually participate in our modelling forum as well, where there's lots of exchange and networking that goes on. So thank you all very, very much for joining us. We'll see people again on the 26th of August, and I'll just stop sharing there and come back for any final questions.
Yeah, Andy, a very nice friend, Andy Sparks, has asked, what speakers do you recommend for putting in the fuel tanks of Heljan O-gauge diesels?
Depends on the model, for a start. I mean, we've got a QSI speaker, HB175R. That works really well inside the tanks of things like class 50s and 37s. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. It wasn't an install I did myself. It was one of my workshop lads that I look after. He did it himself. Oh, it might have been a Deltic, thinking about it. Yeah, I think he put 2 of those in a Deltic once, actually, and that was phenomenal. So yeah, something that's basically going to fit, obviously, is quite important. So do have a measure up. Tell us the size and space that you've got available, and obviously we'll find a speaker to suit that space available.
Thank you.
I will go back to something Tony said earlier. Yes, I did miscomment there. I said sine wave earlier. No, it's square wave. Do apologise.
And then lots and lots of people saying thank you very much for a really interesting evening. People have learned a great deal. And learning, certainly Bill Eaton has said, learning that I can change the track voltage is very useful, and I'll be following this up. So unless there's any other questions from anybody, I'll just on the spotlight so that I can just see in case anybody's waving at me madly saying that they need to ask another question. But otherwise, huge thank you again to John for joining us and spending his evening with us. It's been most useful. Thank you, Ian, for being a co-host. And thank you to everybody else for joining us this evening. It's been really useful, very good discussion, very interesting questions. Some of them well above my level of knowledge, but I have learned a lot, and thank you all very, very much.
Yeah, again, anything DCC related or anything like that, if you guys got questions or anything like that, by all means, I'm here to help. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you all next month.